Good afternoon. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you to the press conference on House Bill 1507, which has been referred to as the Union Deductions Bill. I wanted to talk a little bit about the bill, what the bill actually will do. I do expect some other members to continue trickling in here as we go, given the fact that our session schedule is somewhat tight this afternoon, and I recognize that other members had conflicts with other committee meetings and things. I want to thank all the co-sponsors, some of which are here today, as well as many of the guests that are up here that we're going to hear from shortly. I wanted to talk briefly about the bill and really what my intentions were when we introduced it. House Bill 1507 deals with the deduction related to union and political activity. I'll be very honest, it did somewhat surprise me given the recent attention that this bill has received since I've been working on this issue for some time, and it's been in committee each of the last two sessions. I wanted to briefly outline why I believe we need to address the issue of government collection of political money, and then I'll introduce several other people who've been working on this at different levels. And at the conclusion, I'll obviously be happy to take any questions. I wanted to start briefly with the press packet and kind of walk folks through it, if I may, and then if you have any questions, just make note and then we'll get to them shortly. The first is simply my statement on why I believe this is important. On the left, I actually have a poster of things that we agree on, which I'll revisit here in just a minute, and then talk a little bit about House Bill 1507 and what it does. Additionally, I've included several letters containing statements by the unions in regards to the bills. I've highlighted some of the relevant sections, and we'll be hitting them as we go throughout the press conference as well. But I want to also highlight the pieces of the contract that are in here as well. We have the master agreement related to the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, or AFSCME, where we detail here the collection of the political money and the things associated with that. And in addition to that, we also have the agreement between SEIU and their local chapter. Both of these contain provisions related to the collection of political contributions. Political contributions as defined in the bill, as well as how we would probably define them in our normal lives, is that hard money or actual money that can be given directly to candidates. That is where you attend a fundraiser and then a check is subsequently given on behalf to a candidate. And under current law and current contractual agreements, the government is currently collecting that money. Next, you'll notice a page where SEIU made a donation to the Pennsylvanians for Accountability. That is $180,000 that they disclosed on their LM2 form, which is a federal form. And then there's also a copy of the special report for the state of Wisconsin containing your packet that details the Pennsylvania State Education Association donation to the recall efforts for Governor Walker out there. That's important because this is PSEA. This is not PACE. PACE is their political arm. And this is PSEA, located at 400 North 3rd Street. Additionally, you'll find enclosed in this packet a copy of their IRS disclosure, which they send to their individual members, as well as some other articles detailing political spending. And finally, we're going to get to the copies which I've included in the packet of this material. You'll notice, and I'll start here on my right, we have material that's been distributed throughout the campaigns. I believe that we would all agree that this is openly political material. I don't believe that anybody would refute that, and it ranges from the endorsement of Barack Obama, vote for Barack Obama, has some things regarding candidate Romney, our governor, and again the president. The reason I raise this, and in your packet there's one additional which we did not have time to blow up. It involves the coalition advocating for public schools, or PCAPs. It details the union spending against Mayor Nutter. And I think that's very important because one of the common defenses is, oh, you're just concerned because they're spending money against you. That is not the case. The fact is, this is political money that I think we would all agree on. Some of these even endorse particular candidates and go far beyond issues advocacy, which the groups are allowed to engage in. All of these are fine in a political race. I want to make this very clear. I'm not refuting the group's rights to engage in this kind of activity. the Supreme Court case, commonly referred to as Citizens United, and the IRS regulations and the PSEA disclosure, which are included in your packet, outline the rights and requirements to engage in this kind of activity. What I am questioning is, however, the appropriateness of government collecting political money. Should the government collect political money? Behind and to the left, you'll see things that we agree on. I've said this, and the highlighted portions of the letter also will highlight what the unions have said about this. The Commonwealth currently collects and distributes political contributions, dues, and fair share fees. We've both said that. That's not open for debate. The political contributions are voluntary, but admittedly purely political, and may be given directly to candidates. We've both said that. A portion of dues are used for political purposes, as detailed by these mailers. We've both said that. The unions have indicated in the letters that it likely costs the Commonwealth very little in terms of real dollars to collect this money. I recognize that there's probably not a significant carrying cost going forward, so we are in agreement on that point. And my question is this: if it does not cost us a significant amount of money, why can the unions not assume this cost themselves? Again, I'm not questioning their ability to engage in this activity. I'm questioning our reasons for collecting this money. The only question that really matters in this debate, I believe, is should the government stop collecting political money for organizations? And I understand that there's been some confusion about the bill and what it's actually looking to correct. The issue that I'm concerned about, and what I've been talking about over the last 3 terms, is should we get the government out of the business of political money collecting? We should not be the middleman or the collection agency on behalf of these organizations. Money that the government collected, whether at the state, local, or municipal levels, or at the school district, they collected it and distributed it, and they paid for these mailers and advertisements. Members on both sides of the debate want to talk about things other than the objective of the bill. Remember, the objective is to get the government out of collecting political money. Put up a bright line between political activity and public assets. Cost. I do not refute the cost, as we indicated here. It likely costs us little for ongoing transfers of funds. But it should not be a debate on monetary price for a question of ethical behavior. Additionally, our local counties and municipalities may not be as computerized as the Commonwealth, so for them, this endeavor could in fact cost more money, and as we collect more information, I'll be happy to share it. Many groups have tried to call this something else, and this is probably the biggest issue as we went through this debate. This is not right to work. Right to work says that you may or may not join a union. It's the worker's choice. This bill simply says the union must collect their own political money, dues, and fair share fees. No other group is allowed access to the government to collect their political money. Why are they? It's also not paycheck protection. Paycheck protection passed in Washington state. That was the first state to pass it. That's the requirement where the union, private and public, must obtain permission prior to debiting this amount from someone's check. Many of them do it on an annual basis. This bill is only about taking public assets and removing them from the sphere to be used for the collection of political monies. This does not impact the rights of private unions or private companies to engage in whatever agreements they wish to discuss. It is not any of the names that others have called it. And I understand that members on both sides of the debate might want this to be something more. They want it to be paycheck protection. They want it to be right to work or something else. Why? Why would they want it to be something better or bigger? Because it energizes their bases, that's why. It gets people involved and gives them a sense of urgency. Unfortunately for both sides of this debate, this bill is not about any of these in the purest sense. It's an attempt to fix, as I see it, a glaring ethical problem in our current system. We can have debates over each of those other pieces of legislation, but I would hope that we can at least agree that on the issue of collecting political money, that the government needs to get out of that business. This is merely my proposal. I've been working on it. I've introduced it for 2 terms. I've been working on it closer to 4. If you're not happy with this proposal to get us out of the political money business collection, I'm happy to hear alternatives. That's part of the legislative process. But we have to have a bright line between all of that. Finally, There's been many concerns raised about the bill by public safety workers regarding fair shares, some other groups that may or may not be covered. I'm here to tell you that I've been working since June when I introduced the bill. Been working with the Troopers Association and the FOP and some others to try to find language to address their concerns. We need to include Act 195 employees and other public safety employees other than the non-Act 111. It was not the intent to capture those employees. The merit of their concerns is acknowledged, and I'm hoping that my efforts to address those concerns with those groups is likewise recognized. If there are continued concerns by any groups, I welcome the opportunity to address them so long as we can still achieve the original purpose of the bill, which is get the government out of the business of collecting political money. I believe that's something that we can agree on and something that we can have a meaningful discussion on. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Eichelberger for his comments.
Thank you, Representative Cutler. He's done a tremendous amount of work on this, and I sponsored a bill in the Senate. I had an original bill that had slightly different language, and recognized that Representative Cutler's language was better. Changed my bill and introduced Senate Bill 1034, which is companion legislation to the House bill that we're here talking about today. Just to mention one other aspect of this, and maybe a little admonition. I've been following the media coverage of this very closely, and I think so far the media has done a pretty good job of separating a lot of the rhetoric from the facts of the bill. This bill is very simple, very straightforward. It's a two-page bill, doesn't have much to it. Simply addresses the government collection of PAC money, which is straightforward political funding, and union dues, which we're demonstrating here today is also, in many cases, used in political ways. There are people that used to work in this building that are now sitting in a prison somewhere for mixing political activity with official resources. It is very, very inappropriate for us to continue an activity when we know that government resources, taxpayer funded, are being used to collect political money. I don't care how they use the political money, that's not the point. They are definitely, unquestionably, using political money that we collect with government resources. So that has to end. So I'd ask the media to make sure, through all the hyperbole about unions saying that they can't do their jobs, they don't interfere with their negotiating abilities, they can't represent their customers, whatever. None of that applies. All we're talking about is those two simple changes that would be made that are stated in the legislation. Next on our list is Representative Eli Vankovic.
Thank you, Senator. I want to start by thanking the prime sponsors for putting these bills forward and for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of them. I'd also like to thank the media for helping to create a statewide dialogue on what I believe to be a very important issue and one that might be understood at its outset. I want to make very clear that I believe where this discussion will go is that this issue is not one shrouded in some great political agenda. Rather, this is an issue of right versus wrong. As a lawmaker myself focused on reform and accountability in government, when I became aware of this issue where political money and dues are automatically deducted from government employees' paychecks, I knew immediately that it was wrong. And over the years, Pennsylvanians have become painfully aware of the impact that special interests have within our capital and lobbying in our state. In the last decade, Pennsylvanians have had to bear the embarrassment of what has occurred due to politics being paid for with taxpayer money. And the unfolding of business as usual has been very painful for the people of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvanians have become rightfully skeptical of our political process and equally skeptical of the elected officials who represent them. And by eliminating automatic dues deduction, we will continue to be able to draw bright lines between what government is doing with taxpayer resources and politics. I think that's a very important distinction. I think it's imperative that we continue that work in government reform. And I just want to underline the question. The question is, should government be in the business of collecting political money? And I think we all agree that the answer is no. I look forward to working with my colleagues in the House, the Senate, and the Governor's office to help ensure that we continue to redefine what business as usual looks like in our capital. And we need to stop this inherent political activity paid for by the taxpayers. And it matters. It matters not just at the state level, but it matters at the local level. And we're going to hear from some of our local elected officials, and I'd like to welcome Commissioner Scott Martin from Lancaster.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Representative Cutler and his colleagues in the House for their leadership on this bill, and equally as much Senator Eichelberger and those who are co-sponsoring in the Senate. We're very pleased to see this reform finally being pushed up here, and I know it's been worked on for a long time. My comments will be limited, and I'm pleased to be joined by a lot of my local government colleagues up here from different counties. Quite frankly, the picture I'd like to portray for you from a couple different standpoints. First and foremost, I often hear folks mention that, well, it's really minimal cost to you because you're already in the business of collecting and you have software and packages that do that kind of stuff. And I would argue it's pretty unfair to pull out one thing that you collect. I could pull out and hold out FICA, the things that we have to collect. You know, I still have to collect it. There's still cost that goes into these types of softwares. But in a conversation I had, and I was reminded with Senator Eichelberger outside, was the fact that we have many local governments throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who still do not have computer programming that processes these types of payroll deductions, which means they're doing a lot of this by hand, which is time consuming. And when you talk about the argument of using taxpayer resources, your employees who you're paying with tax dollars to process the collection of monies that are being utilized for political purposes is inappropriate. The other part that I really like to point out, and I'm just going to use an example for you. When we came into office in 2008 in Lancaster County, there were two things. One we could not control because the law doesn't allow it, the issue we're dealing with today. We had something as simple. We were collecting membership dues for a local YMCA. And I remember posing the question saying, well, we live in a pretty large county here, and how is it fair that we're taking care of the cost of doing business for one entity to collect, but the employees that live up next to XYZ gym in the northern end of the county, or down in the southern end, and they're at Curves, or whatever it might be, how is it fair that we're providing to an outside entity the ability to cover their costs of doing business and not them? So that's the question I'd like to pose to all of you. All of us in this room are probably members of some sort of association, some sort of membership group, and that's everybody's right. And this deal does not interfere with anything that's part of that. However, we are picking winners and losers. My NRA contributions, or maybe anyone else up here, guess what? You think other businesses would like their cost of being business to be covered and have someone else collect that so they don't have to engage in that back and forth and sending out invoices and things of that nature? So to me, this bill is common sense. It evens the playing field and doesn't pick who gets to use government resources to engage in their business, and quite frankly, obviously removes the political piece, which is very important when you talk about where this Commonwealth has gone over the last half decade in trying to separate our official business from political business. So thank you.
I'm Scott Ott. I am a county commissioner from Lehigh County. Lehigh County is a home rule charter county, as I'll explain in a bit. And I just wanted to make it clear up front that whatever I say today represents my own views, not any of my board, and not any of these people standing behind me, all of whom I do not know, and some of whom I just met moments ago. I'm glad to have an opportunity to be here. You know, although we've heard this bill is really about union deductions, the legislation has been dubbed, perhaps inaccurately by some, as paycheck protection. In a way, I think it prevents the government from sort of stepping out of the shadows and picking the pocket of the person who works so hard to earn that pay. The government employee who owns it and who alone should decide where to spend that money. It gives the individual the power to decide where a portion of her pay will go. We might also call this legislation, perhaps more accurately, reputation protection for politicians and trust protection for our representative form of government. That's because this measure also builds a layer of defense around the elected official by reducing the chance that honest work could be impugned by allegations of apparent impropriety. I want to give you an example from my own Lehigh County, where I sit with my 8 colleagues on the Board of Commissioners, part-time legislators, under a home rule charter that vests administrative authority and responsibility in an elected county executive. Last November, our newly elected executive beat me, fair and square, for that position. A glance at his last 2 campaign finance reports shows that he received some $28,250 from about a dozen different union groups, including some with whom the county is acquainted and related. Now, this doesn't count contributions from individuals involved in unions or from some political action committees whose names make it difficult for you to determine what their funding source actually is. In addition, members of several of these union groups knocked on doors, made phone calls, worked at the polls for this candidate, and I was beaten by 2 points, and I want to make it clear, all of this union activity is absolutely legal. By the way, I did accept the invitation to appear before the local union council for a candidate interview, and they later thanked me for coming. But they did not trouble my campaign manager with the hassle of another trip to the bank. In other words, they didn't contribute to my campaign. Now, this same executive, elected in part with union muscle and union cash, must now serve all of the people of Lehigh County by negotiating contracts with several of the same collective bargaining units that appear on his campaign finance reports. Now, even a public servant of gleaming integrity and bedrock moral principles is placed in an awkward position by this, don't you agree? I mean, as the old saying goes, follow the money. The county government funnels money from worker paychecks, involuntarily in some cases, to union bank accounts. The unions funnel the money to the candidate, and then that politician, former candidate, sits across the table from union leaders to drive a hard bargain on behalf of the taxpayers. It is a dynamic that has led to sometimes baseless accusations of quid pro quo, back-scratching in smoke-filled rooms, to elegantly mix some metaphors, and frankly, it's not fair to put the public servant in a position where even honest work can be called into question by the appearance of impropriety. Restoring to government employees the freedom to voluntarily contribute to labor organizations not only reestablishes the worker's sovereignty over her property, but also protects the politician from accusations that his negotiations were perhaps a little less vigorous than they might have been, because he has a personal interest in the prosperity of those organizations. In Lehigh County, and this is why I was invited here today, in Lehigh County just last week, a supermajority of our board passed a motion granting protection for these employees and for the public servants' reputations. The motion, introduced by my colleague, Commissioner Mike Schwer, says this: the Lehigh County Board of Commissioners directs the administration in all future negotiations between the County of Lehigh and employee bargaining units, including meet and discuss units, to remove the county as dues collection agent for any third-party membership organizations. So there we got your NRA and YMCA covered as well. Under our home rule charter, the board is empowered to negotiate contracts, but years ago it delegated that responsibility to the county executive. And since the executive is now working for the board in that function, he's been instructed to remove the county as the dues collecting agent for the unions. More than half of the 2,100-person workforce of Lehigh County lives under collective bargaining. This won't affect some contracts that are currently in negotiation, but going forward it will. If the executive should balk at fulfilling the instructions that he's been directed to accomplish by the board may decide to delegate the negotiating authority to somebody else or to do it ourselves. Now, this is exciting news in this whole field out of Lehigh County, but only a handful of Pennsylvania's 67 counties enjoy partial autonomy that we call home rule. And that's why it's so important, I believe, for Pennsylvania's legislature to pass this union deduction legislation, and so important for the governor to sign it. I have heard that Governor Corbett, as late as yesterday, I've heard that Governor Corbett will sign it if it gets to his desk. I would challenge the governor to move beyond this passive position and to actively and publicly work to make sure that it gets to his desk. Governor Corbett, it was perhaps for a time such as this that you have been elevated to this executive role. To all of our Pennsylvania lawmakers and Governor Corbett, I urge that you move boldly to protect the hard-earned paychecks of government workers, and as you do so, perhaps not intentionally, you'll help to bolster the trust in elected officials that is the mother's milk of representative government. Thank you.
With that, we'll be happy to take any questions that you might have, and I know we have to be back on the floor at 2:30, so we'll try to be quick.